start with the license. How did you get it?
Yeah.
And where is it heading now?
Yeah, and to be very clear, to lay this out for the audience, so there's two types of companies when it comes to regulated cannabis that's really important. Plant touching, so those are the entities that legally are allowed and are regulated to interact with the plant. Those can be either cultivators, so the growers on the agricultural side, processors or manufacturers, think oils, edibles, kitchens, and then the actual retail component, typically referred to as a dispensary. On the medical side of the cannabis market, and remember, we have an interesting emerging industry here that's sometimes medical, legalized at the state level, sometimes adult use recreational, sometimes a hybrid. So those three main facility parts of the license, and that's how you typically connect the cannabis operations, is at the real estate and facility level. So again, your grow, your cultivation, your manufacturing or processing site, and then the retail dispensary component.
So those are the different kinds of licenses.
Three main types of licenses, or in some cases, here where we are in Arizona, they can be vertically integrated. So a winner or a receiver, awardee of a license they applied for, can get all elements of that vertical chain, or in some states they're separated.
Why wouldn't you want all of them? I mean, yeah, that's the thing. It's all about vertical integration, right?
It's so funny. We think about and ponder that question all the time. If you look at other big industries that are very mature, say the food industry, some of those farm to fork enterprises do want to control the whole vertical.
Good point.
Some, a burger shop might not want to be a rancher and slaughter their own cows.
Sure.
So
So I see.
That's what we talked about just a moment ago, was that plant touching side. Then you have all these ancillary companies, non-plant touching, like real estate. So for zoned properties, our company, we are very specifically not plant touching. We never take ownership of the operating entity. We're strictly real estate developers, consultants. We have a commercial brokerage, and we acquire and own real estate we develop and lease.
Okay.
And so if you delineate yourselves as an investor, as a company, on the non-plant touching side, tends to mitigate your risk with things like trying to get financing. Insurance is a really big one. Navigating local contracts and engagements.
When you say real estate, you mean like the retail shop, the warehouse, things like that, where you're just facilitating the building.
Correct. Sometimes land, so sometimes build to suite.
Okay.
But facility, real property, the buildings, the infrastructure that is there. A lot of these cannabis licenses are required to be attached to an address or a parcel to be awarded.
Okay.
So that's a huge
And then
part of the
somebody
industry.
else comes in with a license to plant touching. So
Correct.
they'll grow it, package it,
That's right.
hire the people to sell it, that kind of thing?
Yep.
Okay. And then your company does not mess with that?
Correct.
How do you decide whether or not they're going to be a good operator? Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, right?
Well, let me elaborate, too. It's not even that banks don't like it. A lot of them won't even touch it because it's not federally legal.
Right. So at the high level, especially for anyone in the audience who knows very little about cannabis or never interacted with it, the big challenge we have here is there's now 37 states over the past about 15 years that have legalized some form of cannabis, medical, adult use, growing, retail, the whole vertical, in various capacities, and every state is different. And that state and federal law conflict is the big deal we're talking about here, that it's still federally illegal as a controlled substance, which is wild because there's congressional activity right now trying to legalize it, recognizing that this is a valuable product for society. Some polling shows about 80% of Americans favor some form of legalization. I mean, when's the last time we had a unified
on anything.
Opinion on anything,
80%
right?
of anything.
Yep.
Yeah.
So because of that federal and state law conflict and this potpourri of non-standard regulations, things like financing, insurance, and legal work extremely challenging, as well as for the non-plant touching companies. But there are avenues, especially real estate, which is a tangible asset, that is a really good strategy for investing in and bringing capital into an industry that is very difficult to do otherwise.
So how do you evaluate that? So let's say you buy a building, attach a license to it. How do you know, is that the collateral for you, the license?
So sometimes, specifically, and we can get back to this nuance, but got to remember, if you're collateralizing something that's federally illegal, does that move you into the gray area or moving towards plant touching? So we're very different now in 2022 than we were a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Now it's becoming much more commonplace to have these deal structures. I mean, even 18 months ago, you could not find an escrow and title company to do deals for you. It was very rare. It'd be very rare to find a local bank even that would do a first position commercial mortgage.
Okay.
That stuff is becoming more and more common. But the valuation, especially for real estate people like we are, it's all about that highest and best use. So for owner-operators, a lot of the times cannabis companies like to own their own real estate because you get to control the asset. You're not at risk under a lease. They may have conflicting language of federally illegal activity, those types of things. So if you're in the industry as an investor or a real estate owner, get a great land use attorney, get a great real estate transactional attorney to review these things. But the asset itself, cannabis is almost always the highest and best use, the thing that's going to create the best capitalization of the asset, mainly because of supply and demand. So it's all about the zoning. That's really what it comes down to. So in order to get in the cannabis industry and make the mega bucks, you need a license. In order to get a license, almost always you have to have real estate to apply. And in order to secure the real estate, you got to work through the financing and the local zoning. So supply and demand, as we will, I mean, it's really a NIMBY conversation.
For sure.
So we're bringing something new into our communities.
Which means not in my backyard.
Not in my backyard.
For those of you that don't know.
Yep. And so as the state legalizes, they pass it down to the localities. There's 40,000 localities in this country, townships, cities, counties. And sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it wrong. Depending on that local regulations, you maybe only have a handful of parcels of properties in the entire jurisdiction that it can be zoned and permitted to be a cannabis site. So that supply demand causes these properties to go way up in value as the highest and best use. But you got to be careful because as the industry matures, that zoning may change. And if you're a real estate investor, you want to make sure you're not paying quadruple, 10 times the value of an asset simply because it can be used for cannabis at that time. I mean, it's interesting if you look at the data, and again, state by state basis, but Arizona's projected to do nearly 1.5 billion with a B this calendar year in the state of Arizona. There's only 170 licenses, meaning there can only be 170 storefronts. Right. So we have clients. We have a lot of clients in the state of Arizona. We've worked with nearly half of those operators in Arizona, though we do service clients nationwide and have projects nationally. But some of our clients are doing 5 to 10 million a month.
Well, what are some of the obstacles? And more importantly, you touched on something I really want to make sure our listeners hear. There has to be risks as these cannabis people are out raising money. So what should somebody, if they're going to invest $100,000 hard-earned money with a cannabis person or a cannabis company, what are, because you mentioned they make sure you get into the zoning, but most people don't know really what to look for.
Sure.
So what should they ask?
Yeah. Number one thing, like in real estate, location, cannabis is learn. It's constantly evolving. Read everything you can, especially if you're looking to write a check or get invested into the industry. It's just such a challenge because we're not creating a brand new industry. It's emerging from hundreds of years of underground activity. In the industry, we call it legacy cannabis. So these are sometimes cannabis experts, growers. One guy just the other day, I can't remember who it is, but it's called it a street corner pharmacist. So this is an industry that's existed and has been probably $1 billion industry ever since Prohibition came.
Right. Yep.
So we have to start to correct by learning and educating, really address that fear. But that education piece is so critical because it's in the community level. People are very afraid that as you legalize cannabis, it's going to come into their town and it's going to bring crime and hurt property values. But it's what we've found so far, the exact opposite. So as long as we figure out the right way to legalize this, and to me, it comes to the regulators, of course, backed by the voters in many cases, but it's the built environment. So the zoning and permitting, master planning in our communities, where do we want these things to be? What makes sense? Do you want to put them out by industrial manufacturing, a retail consumer-facing site, that's where a lot of the first communities put all cannabis because they were worried about it and fearful.
Optics.
Now we know, put it right exactly where retail is. That's right where it belongs, next to pharmacies, some cases near doctor offices, some cases standalone buildings, some cases strip centers, so that learn for the audience. If you're considering investing or getting involved, you need to know that it's not just the standard commercial real estate risks, but there is regulatory risk in cannabis that does not apply to other commercial real estate. So you may enter into a strip center, for example, or let's say you own a strip center and you're considering bringing a cannabis tenant in. You need to make sure that your insurance isn't going to be violated by having that use.
That's a big one.
That's huge. Yeah. If you have debt on the property that's federally backed, you better make sure that you're not about to violate $50 million worth of loans.
So local banks and local insurance policies.
Everything local, right? Definitely. At the moment. I mean, it's...
So if you'd used a local Arizona-based bank with an Arizona-backed loan, you would be okay.
Yeah, and there's several. So it's starting to get more commonplace. As I mentioned, even 6, 12, 18 months ago, you couldn't really find an escrow or title officer. Now there's national title companies that will handle cannabis and do lots of it.